Well, I think as everyone at PPC knows, we're on record as saying that we want to significantly expand our business in Africa. And if you look at the theme of today's conference, which is the infrastructure development in Africa, it's an exciting happening for all infrastructure companies, especially cement companies. So we're bringing together like-minded people who are interested in infrastructure development, creating a forum where we can talk about the experiences, share our ideas, and learn about doing business in Africa.
Our role is essentially to facilitate growth of the company. The aspirations, as you know, the vision for PPC is to be an African player, which means being more than just South Africa. At the moment, we're in South Africa, Botswana, Zimbabwe, and Mozambique. But the idea is to get into East Africa a bit, countries like Rwanda, Kenya, Tanzania, Ethiopia, and then get into Central Africa, the DRC, get into West Africa, Ghana, Nigeria, and countries like that. Everybody's talking about the attractiveness of Africa as a destination for investors. You've seen maybe you've seen the Ernst & Young's Africa Attractiveness Survey. We have them talking about it here today. You've heard about how Africa is becoming a favored destination for investors. It is growing at a higher rate than the world global economic growth, almost equal to South America, nearly as good as Asia. So it is a place to go. You cannot get to understand that and appreciate it if you don't start acknowledging days like Africa Day.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure. Victor has already done so, but let me do so again to just bid you a hearty welcome this morning on behalf of PPC. We hope that you will enjoy the morning with us, and I'm sure that you will, I'm confident that you will find it interesting. Today, as Victor said, is I think in the first part a celebration. It's tomorrow, the 25th of May, is the 49th anniversary of the founding of the Organization for African Unity in Addis Ababa in 1963. And at the time, the 25th of May was designated as Africa Day, and it is still celebrated as such and probably will be into the future. We at PPC, as Victor said, a modest beginning today, but we certainly hope to see this as a growing annual event, and we're certainly looking forward to host the 50th anniversary of Africa Day at this time next year. Doing some of our strategic research, I think one of the perhaps interesting aspects that's come out for us is the vastness of the African continent. Not many people realize that the African continent, in terms of land area, is quite a lot larger than the whole of the continent of North America. It's almost double the size of the continent of South America and is more than 3 times larger than the continent of Europe. So Africa is a huge continent. It's second only to Asia. And if one looks at the infrastructure that is currently in place in Africa, I think everyone will concede that the infrastructure that is in place in this huge continent isn't sufficient to service the almost 1 billion people that currently live on the continent. And what is also apparent, us that move around in Africa, and if you simply read of the news that is coming out of Africa, it's very apparent that most, if not all the countries in Africa are going to embark on a major infrastructure drive in the decades ahead. And that creates huge opportunity, especially for infrastructure-focused companies, cement companies. And we in PPC are already on record as saying that we see ourselves significantly expanding our operations beyond the 4 countries in Southern Africa where we currently do business in the years ahead. But we don't only see business opportunities, commercial opportunities. I think we also see a responsibility to better the lives of the people and the communities that will be engaging with our operations. So all in all, I think over the next few years, we see on the continent of Africa an extension of what PPC is already today, and certainly a huge growth opportunity.
Just to give us an idea of what your role is in the infrastructure story of Africa. Paul, may I start with you, please?
Yes, Africa Project Access, we assist about 84 companies with early alert of projects throughout sub-Saharan Africa. Outside South Africa, because most of our clients are based here and they're export managers, they don't have responsibility for South Africa. So we go Lesotho, Swaziland, all the way to Mauritania, the Indian Ocean Islands and so on. It's all about where, who, how much, when, and how. So I deal project by project. I'm a micro guy, not a macro guy. So I rather look at individual projects, and from that I extrapolate trends, especially project trends throughout the continent. I just returned now from Solwezi. My main focus at the moment is the hotspots in Africa. For example, the story in Lake Albert in Uganda, the Mtwara story in Tanzania, the Tet story in Zambezi Valley. That's where we're focusing on. Cement is a very, very strong issue here. We've been working on cement for about 3-4 years now because it's intrinsic to African growth. I don't just do infrastructure. I cover ICT, agriculture, a whole lot of things. But anyway, that's just the introduction.
The Africa Chief Directorate, we're basically focusing on building bilateral relations between South Africa and partner countries in the continent to drive economic cooperation and development. Our main focus is around really looking at issues of market access, how we open up markets for South African companies to be able to do trade and investment with the rest of the continent. And secondly, to also look at issues around technical cooperation that would lead, to issues around, for example, harmonization of standards and ensuring that we remove non-tariff barriers, to trade. And also involved in promoting cross-border development through what we call the Special Development Initiatives, or commonly called, the SDIs, and the popular one, is the Maputo Corridor.
Our mandate is to promote sustainable economic development into Africa through the private sector. The NEPAD Business Foundation was set up just after the NEPAD framework was signed, and effectively it was Thabo Mbeki came back to the country, got some of the key leaders, Rural Causa in particular, and said to drive economic development into Africa, it's not going to happen unless you bring the private sector on board. And just the kind of thing we do, just as an example, is we've got a water project that is sponsored by SAB at the moment, where we've got some of the key water players in South Africa, and we're working with Department of Water Affairs and some of the big development agencies in trying to create sustainable water in South Africa to 2030.
They believe that South Africa holds the roadmap, to the continent. They would like to see those kind of joint ventures with South African companies in taking up those opportunities. But he also made this particular point. He said, but what they have also observed with South African business is that it looks at everything from a risk point of view. And he said from them, as the Chinese, risk does not apply in their vocabulary. Everything is opportunity.
I can say one thing. Our record on regional projects, and Inga is an absolute example of that, has been appalling in the past. Kazangula is another real example, where Zimbabwe even now doesn't want to take part, as we speak now. But it is improving. I think the imperatives, we're getting to a different, it's not business as usual anymore. We're getting to a stage now where these imperatives are so in your face that they have to be dealt with. So I'm actually quite optimistic about that. Now, that's what we're dealing with right now. Bergstan, one of my clients, has done the feasibility study. So we are busy. So these regions are unlocking these resources, because you cannot move the resources without the logistics.
Certainly. Power, Derek.
The resource behind the power in terms of things like coal are also, on big priority. And I think for me, the ability to get that power in terms of the resource side of it, the gas from the Mozambique gas fields, how do you actually get that offshore? And a lot of that is driving the infrastructure development. But if you take a place like Mozambique, it's not coordinated at the moment. I think one of the big issues in Mozambique is that the government is playing each entity off against each other. What are they doing in terms of trying to get the infrastructure down to the ports? Is they actually giving concessions to individuals, which is actually not the right thing to do in terms of the country's development. It might be in the interest of the individual organization, but not the country. The issues in terms of development in Africa, and the ones that political, I think there has been a lot that's been happening on the political, and as those political areas get dealt with, I think The second biggest one is corruption, and that's another area that we're looking at with Institute of Directors for Southern Africa at the moment.
Right.
How do we actually get proper corporate governance in these countries? And what we are going to do, and I guess we will come and talk to the various sort of big organizations, is how can we pull people together and go as one from a private sector side, but also bring in the government and the development agencies.
Right.
Because development agencies are the big sort of funders in a lot of these African countries. So and they also have a lot of political clout because of the amount of funding that they're putting in. So if we can get the three groups together in terms of talking and make sure we're dealing with the community, I think that's the way to go.
It was very interesting because we've got a lot of clients actually moving into Africa, and they've all got the same perception of corruption, and some have fallen, some have actually done very well.
I think for any business, South African, African, or from any other continent, I think Africa is definitely top of the radar for a lot of companies. And even NGOs as well. So yeah, absolutely, very interesting and very relevant.
There are lots of legal issues that I think we need to tap into again. We got 1 or 2 companies from South Africa who are dealing in the DRC right now, and they feel that there's a lot of I think discrepancies in terms of what we understand about legalities and their terms. And a good example is, in South Africa we've got a way of dealing with shareholder agreements. In the DRC, not necessarily so. So companies, we go with a mindset, once again, probably a South African type of mindset. We go in and we say, we're going to have our company-to-company shareholder agreement, but what we're forgetting is the country has also got a judiciary system that has to cover what we have agreed on. So many companies get burned because they do a one-on-one agreement and they forget about the overall agreement. And I think that I would like to see more talks regarding that. But overall, this has been fantastic.
Our research is the second edition of the Africa Attractiveness Survey, and we surveyed around 500 business people across the globe, so it's not only in Africa. But we also commissioned the economic research as well, and also consulted with the FDI reports. And what makes me positive about Africa is that the foreign direct investment is increasing and it is improving. And the perceptions are about Africa, although there are still some negative perceptions, but we are starting to see that change, especially with businesses that are already doing business in Africa. I'm also positive about the fact that regional integration is now being prioritized, and we will see more free trade, with the free trade arrangement that's being discussed at the moment. But also, we're seeing more and more Africans that are outside, that have been outside Africa, coming back and giving back and wanting to make a difference in their various countries.
So over the next few years, we see this very vast continent going into overdrive as far as infrastructure development is concerned, and that's what creates the opportunity and the interest for PPC. But we don't only see an opportunity to do business, I think we also see a responsibility to get involved with the lives of the people, the communities that will be involved with our factories and our operations. So all in all, I think very fitting for PPC. It's an extension of what we already do in South Africa, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and we really look forward to expanding our footprint in Africa.